Okay. Hello, Michael. Hello. Welcome to the BTS Creative Academy podcast. This is episode 161. We're here with Michael Fausti.
Hello.
We're live. We're uncut. We're here to discuss your latest film, Burnt Flowers. I'm the host, Martin Colton. For those that don't know,
Hello,
and
Martin.
hello. Nice to meet you, Michael.
Nice to meet you, sir.
Thank you for joining me today. You're about to attend the Romford Film Festival. That's how I heard about you.
I'm indeed.
To show off your latest film. Tell me a little bit about Burnt Flowers. I've had a watch myself. I've seen
Thank
the movie. Very interesting. I like the style. Got a very cult feel to it.
Good.
Can you say that before a film comes out that it's got a cult feel?
Yeah, I think you can. I like to anyway, as part of my marketing and publicity.
Mhm. Well, in your words, what's the film about?
The film, in its kind of broadest strokes, is about a detective who is approached by a mysterious femme fatale to find her missing husband. And really, that was the kind of sort of jumping off point for what I wanted to be a kind of sort of almost sort of subconscious exploration for the main character in terms of her own kind of past. So this woman who's coming in to sort of present this case to this detective is really the vehicle that will then get the main character, Frances Alban, to actually examine her own past. And a kind of constant reference point for me is often The Wizard of Oz, which is a film that really freaked me out as a kid and has sort of psychologically damaged me ever since. And really, I just like this idea of people who go on these kind of journeys, which are actually really internal journeys, and meet a bunch of strange characters, and then actually sort of find themselves reevaluating where they were at the start. And so, in its broadest terms, I guess Burnt Flowers is a thriller come horror.
Mhm.
But I suppose it comes under that sort of like slightly vague term of psychological horror.
Yeah, and I got that. I got a slight sense of gangster
Yes.
movie element in there
Yes.
as well as a little bit of slasher in there.
Well,
Um,
indeed. I mean, you're sort of basically citing two of my sort of, favorite sort of subgenres there, Martin. I guess the gangster film is really a subgenre of the crime movie, and the slasher is, a subgenre of horror. And I was sort of talking to somebody the other day about this. I was actually talking to producer Lou Nosbod about this, who's my partner. And I think really these days it's very difficult to actually find something which is really pure in terms of genre. Virtually
mhm,
everything we're watching is a kind of hybrid. If you look at successful shows on Netflix or successful movies of recent years, you can't really just sort of say, oh, it's this one thing. And I think that today's audiences are very sort of cine literate, and they like this kind of sort of very postmodern idea of sort of hybridity and sort of
mhm.
bringing all things together. And it's something I like to do in my films. I sort of, I love gangster movies and I love a lot of the tropes of gangster movies, but I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
really know if I'd want to make an entire gangster movie. I think that a lot of the sort of toxic masculinity after a while might get a bit tedious. So I like just bringing in these elements of these sort of, criminal types, but bringing them into sort of these more sort of stranger worlds, really, I guess.
Yeah, and I can really see the influences of all different types of cinema within this film. Instantly, when I was watching it, I was thinking, this feels like a piece out of the 1960s. This
Ah,
doesn't
thank you.
this doesn't necessarily feel like a film that I'm watching today. It feels like a film that I should have already seen.
Oh,
If
wow.
that
They
if that
do
if that
you
makes
know
any
what?
sense.
I'm so pleased you said that, because that was always our intention. We really wanted this idea that this was really a 60s film. And at the end, and I don't want to give any spoilers because, it's going to be playing at Romford at the weekend. But at the
Mhm,
end, these sort of two time zones in which the characters exist do just kind of, come together at the end.
mhm,
And when I was having a conversation with Kamal Yildirim, who's our cinematographer and highly accomplished director in his own right, this is what we said from the start. We want this to look like a 60s movie that's kind of been forgotten, that, you know, has suddenly been rediscovered. So thank you very much for that.
Also gave me a vibe of David Bowie, The Man That Fell to Earth.
Mm. Oh
Something a
man.
little something a little bit off about it. You know, I love that film, and when I say off and peculiar, something where you don't kind of
Yes.
feel safe watching it. You don't
Well,
kind of you feel a little bit of uneasiness there.
Well, I'm kind of wondering, Martin, whether you've been in my front room for about the last year and I've not noticed you, because all of the things you're saying are the sort of things that we actually discussed. And The Man Who Fell to Earth is one of those movies that, like yourself, I really love, and was
Mm,
made by director, let me get it right, Nick Rogue, who filmed one of my favorite films of all time, which is Performance, which is a major reference for Burnt Flowers. But we were talking about The Man Who Fell to Earth when we were kind of in pre-production for Burnt Flowers,
mm.
because I get what you're saying about sort of the Man Who Fell to Earth is a bit off. It's kind of like, what's going on now? You know?
It's intrigued you're intrigued, aren't you? You're pulled
Yes.
into it because
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily fit with like your film doesn't fit within the genres.
No.
It doesn't yeah, there's something mysterious about it, and it opens a lot of questions about what is going on here? What is
Yes.
this about? Mm. So it's
And
in
you
the
know,
storytelling as well as the filmmaking style
yeah,
as well.
yeah. I mean, one of the things I really love about The Man Who Fell to Earth is you never really quite get a handle on him as a character. And I
Mhm.
like that idea about our sort of like main protagonists, that, you know, that there's something about them that always remains a bit unknowable, and I kind of like that, because normally that's projected onto the villain, that they've got some dark past that they can't talk about. But
Mhm.
rarely do you kind of get protagonists like you do in The Man Who Fell to Earth, who you never really get a handle on. And I heard a really interesting kind of interpretation of what's going on in the story, which actually suggests that really he's an alcoholic who's abandoned his family. And this is all just the kind of fantasy that he's constructed to kind of make himself, you know, the hero of this narrative. And
Mm.
the film that we're currently in pre-production with, that very much has had a bearing on that narrative. The idea that characters within films create their own narratives, and you can't quite trust what's going on. So there's a lot in, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in The Man Who Fell to Earth, which, and as you say, you never really quite get a handle on it. And you sort of think, you know, there is something off about this, but I kind of like it. But at the same time, am I really getting entirely what's going on here? And that's an element I like to bring to my sort of both writing and filmmaking.
That's my favorite type of film, is that one that leaves you with questions. It
Mm,
leaves you thinking about it afterwards.
yes.
Even to the point of, did I enjoy that? Did I like it?
Yeah.
And the more I
Yeah.
think about it, I tend to like it. I think the
Yes.
first time I saw The Man That Fell to Earth, I didn't get it at all, and I was like, "This was awful.
No.
What was it?" But
I mean,
then you sit back a year later, you consider it again, and hence why that film is a cult classic.
yes.
Be
And I think I like that idea that a film comes back to you. You know,
Mhm,
there's, I mean, you know, how many millions of hours of films have we watched in our lives, and yet how
mhm,
many actually stay with us? And I like the idea of a film that kind of comes back to you almost like in pieces. When Burnt Flowers screened down at a festival in Hastings, at the Hastings Rocks Festival, the one of the festival directors, James, said to me that after the screening, a member of the audience came up to him the next day and said, "Last night I dreamt of burnt flowers." And I think, to me, that's something I really like, the idea that, you know, we're kind of invading people's dream spaces. And a lot of people have said to me, "Oh, I really want to watch it again." And I
mm,
think that's a huge compliment, you know, to actually
yeah,
have people say, "I want to watch your film again," you know, maybe because, you know, I didn't quite get what was going on, or actually just
mhm.
want to sort of cross-reference or some of the things that I think was going on.
One thing I really appreciated when I watched your film, and I really liked to see in a new film, is the way that you weren't afraid to hold the camera on a shot, that you
Yes.
weren't afraid to let the actors act
Yeah.
and see their emotions, and for a scene to play out. You see too many films now, or I see too many films where everything's so fast and choppy, and
Yes.
uh, yeah, everything's being cut up very, very quickly to keep the pace, to keep the attention. Whereas with your film, you allow the actors and you allow the performances this space to breathe and grow, and yeah, it brings in this question of what's going to happen next. It makes you think rather than
Yes.
just being fed information all the time.
Yes. I mean, I know you're an actor yourself, Martin, and kind of one of the things that I like working with actors, and I like kind of actors who take their time with performance. And I mean, a lot of stage acting, a lot of film acting often relies on dialogue. In other words, two people having a conversation, and it's kind of like, in some respects, this is the most boring thing in the world to film: two people having a conversation, because really, nothing's happening. And huge hats off to sort of all of our talent who's involved with Burnt Flowers, in that I don't think it ever really feels like that you're watching conversations. And one of the things I've sort of taken on board is this idea of what they, I'm sure you're familiar, the idea of listening to the other actor, and that idea that the other actor is more important than you. And I like
Mhm,
to sort of like try and work with that idea, particularly in the edit, that you don't just have one person say one line of dialogue, then the next person say theirs. So it just
mhm,
becomes this kind of tennis match of information until, yeah, we're finished and let's move on to, something more interesting. And I
mhm.
think to actually give actors that space where you're not hurrying them and you actually retreat back a bit and just say, look, let's just run the scene. I don't like being too intrusive with direction.
Mhm,
I have very extended conversations with people before we get on set. Normally, like this via Zoom, in which we'll do a read and we'll discuss the character. The reality of kind of independent film is that you'll get to a location which you've got for a limited amount of time. You've
mhm,
either borrowed this location or you're paying by the hour. So you don't often have the luxury of rehearsal.
mm,
And I just really am blown away by actors who can just engender something under these, quite trying conditions sometimes. And it's, for me, it's always more about the non-verbal communication with actors. And you only really get that if you take your time with an edit. And as you're saying, sometimes people just want to have these very fast-paced, you
mhm.
know, scenes in which, people are kind of like making statements at each other and then boom, we're done. But I think if somebody has a camera presence, why not let the camera just stay on them for a while? And
Mhm.
also, I think that, if something is interesting, then just let it play out. Sometimes I think you can be sort of too intrusive as a director. So, yeah,
Mm.
I do like to let the camera just sometimes just sit there and just sort of take in what we're seeing. Sometimes it can be quite awkward as well, which I think can add to characterization.
Yeah, and it adds to the feel of the film. But
Mm,
it's very brave to do that now, isn't it? To film in a style like that breaks the current norms, that breaks the current traditions that we have in cinema of that quick, choppy editing. Whereas
yes.
let's have a bang, bang, bang conversation and then off to the next scene, rather than the way that you're letting things play out. So I know that we do that editing for attention, don't we? Because we feel I think we're told audiences that our attention span is getting less, audiences. But is that true?
I think we're told this, but the evidence is kind of contradictory. So we kind of hear about, oh, people have got the attention span of a TikTok video, and so don't
Mhm,
try bother making anything longer than that. But if you actually look at successful movies of recent years, many of these movies are actually quite long. I mean, a movie which I really loved is Saltburn, which I think is over 3 hours. I think it's like 3 hours 15 minutes. And then if
mm,
you look at many of the kind of blockbusters of recent years, again, they are weighing in at 2 hours. I mean, my own personal feeling is no movie should really be longer than 90 minutes. And it still
mhm.
grieves me that I couldn't get Burnt Flowers down to 90 minutes. It's 99 minutes. It's 99 minutes and 25 seconds, I think. That's how long it took me to edit it, but I know exactly the
I
running
think
time.
I think sometimes, especially when you're making your own movie, it is when you've got that product there, unless you're told, right, with an
Yeah.
independent film, film, you've got that freedom to go, well, it's 99 minutes, it's not 90 minutes.
Yes.
Mm,
Um, I don't know. I mean, are people's attention spans getting shorter? I suppose I think people are becoming more demanding, and I don't mean
mhm,
that in a negative way. I mean that they are expecting more to be packed in their kind of like 90 minutes, 2 hours. So, I mean, if you look at many movies from 40s and the 50s, there were a lot of these kind of scenes in which people sat in a dining room and spoke at each other, and we do have scenes like that in Burnt Flowers. But
mm,
really, the pacing was much slower, and I think that if anything has changed, it is the pacing that audiences expect. So they expect a kind of a massive hit in the face within about the first 30 seconds.
yeah,
Then you can
yeah,
slow down a little bit. By about 10 minutes, though, you better have something else happening.
mm.
But yeah, I don't know. I guess it's probably down to sort of pacing and structuring, really.
Yeah, and
But
I think you're right about the being demanding, and you see that with, like, social media and
mm,
the way that social media is sort of consumed. There is a link to how that's consumed because it's a form of entertainment to
yes,
how cinema is consumed, and there's just the whole marketplace for entertainment is so saturated now. There's
yeah,
so much available to us that how do we decide what we're gonna pick to watch? How do we decide what we're going to consume?
yeah. I mean, it's extremely difficult, and I mean, there's kind of two answers to that. You know, you're never going to actually anticipate what people want to watch because nothing is really predictable. If the history of creativity and art and music has told us anything, it's like you just can't predict it. And so I don't think you should, as a creative. I don't think you should kind of sit there and kind of sort of think, well, there's so much content out there. What can I do to grab attention? Because I was sort of, again, the festival was recently asked this question, would you consider becoming really commercial? And in one respect, if commercial means, having loads of money, yeah, of course I would. I'll do it tomorrow if you want. But if you mean just go and make something because you think people will watch it, then
Mm,
no, because I don't think, however, you've got to be true to yourself. And I know that's a sort of horrible cliche, but you can't just go and make something because you think people are going to watch it. If that's the case, go and buy a dog or a cat and film that because people love watching those. You've
mhm,
got to kind of just create what you want to create. And yeah, you're right. There is a lot of noise and there is a lot of choice out there. And how do you actually kind of like press through that as an independent creative? And the
mhm.
answer is there is no single answer to actually kind of, because if there was, I would, be latching onto it and doing workshops, telling lots of
And
people about what
everyone would,
it is. Yeah, yeah, an online lecture series available, but unfortunately there isn't. And I mean, it is a very difficult question to answer because what I come back to, and it ends up becoming almost like a personal philosophy, is this idea of what people are now speaking about of the 1,000 fans idea, that in the future the idea of mass audiences will be gone. They won't really exist, and we'll possibly be moving to a kind of like a time and a space in which all of our entertainment is AI generated for a mass audience, but
mhm,
that won't satisfy. And really, as an independent creative, you shouldn't be thinking, how can I get the kind of audience that Disney has, or how do I get the kind of audience that a director like, Christopher Nolan has? You make what you make, and then you will find a fan base for it. The same is true of music. If you're in a heavy metal band and somebody comes to you and sort of says, do you know what, country and western's really popular. Why don't you guys, stop being a heavy metal band and become a country and western band? You go, no. And I think really that's the idea of sort of like independent creativity, that you make what you want to make. And whilst the financial side of things is hard, and cutting through all of the other stuff that's out there to try and get your message through is hard.
mhm.
These are the only movies I know how to make. And even if you gave me a big budget, I'd probably still end up making something very similar to Burnt Flowers anyway. To cut through all that noise, I don't know, but I just kind of think that we will get to almost a version of extreme niche audiences in
Mm,
which we're almost having what we feel is this one-to-one relationship with our creatives. And you can already see it through things like Patreon and stuff like that, in which, you're not really bothered about kind of hitting these huge heights, but you just want to kind of form a small fan base so you can just essentially carry on creating. I know that was a very long-winded answer.
No, no, there's lots there to unpack. So how do you know that? How do you know, or how do you target that audience? How do you let that audience know that this is a film worth watching, that this is worth their time?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and I think ultimately, what I do is I look at movies I like, and I
Hmm.
kind of sort of. So when I was designing the poster for Burnt Flowers, I kind of sort of thought, how do I do this? Because again, as an independent creative, I'm doing that. So I'm doing all of the kind of publicity. I'm cutting the trailer. I did a little radio spot for Romford the other day. And all I
Hmm.
just come back to are my own personal reference points. So I kind of sort of think, I know, I'll make it look a bit like a sort of video nasty poster, because they always attracted attention, even
Hmm.
if they weren't particularly truly representative of what the film was like. And so I suppose you have your own kind of sort of personal reference points, your own kind of pool of knowledge, which is what informs your approach to how you're going to reach your fans. And I suppose that, in essence, you're kind of trying to reach out to people who are going to be receptive to that. And
And I
you
feel like I hear what you're saying also is that you're trying to reach out to people with similar likes and interests to
mm,
you. You're
yes,
trying to reach out to people that are of the same kind of, yeah, of the same kind of interest, the same kind of those films that you loved,
yes,
that you're building on, you're kind of letting them know that this is of that same type.
yes. And
Mm,
and really, I think a bit like going back to our heavy metal versus country and western band. At the end of the
mhm,
day, this is my box of paints that I kind of reach for. And if somebody turned around to me and said, "Well, look, why don't you make this? Because this particular kind of demographic, would go and watch it." It's kind of like, yeah, I could do that, but then AI can do that for you. Or as we have with many kind of American shows now, this idea of writing by a group of people, which has always existed within soap operas, but that isn't going to appeal to people for long. It's that kind of sort of bubblegum versus food idea. And I
mhm,
think really as an indie, I mean, I was having a conversation the other day with a sort of fellow indie director, Andrew Elias, who plays Danny in Burnt Flowers. And we were kind of sort of saying, how do you shift that needle? You're reaching this amount of people, but how do you get beyond that?
mhm.
And yeah, I mean, do you go down the route of kind of like, paying for marketing and publicity? But then this is a beast that continually needs feeding, and the big six studios will spend hundreds of millions in advertising, and they will still have flops on their hands.
Mm.
So, and this is actually kind of one of the nice.
This is from your own pocket, isn't it? This is you made
Yeah,
this movie through the money that you could get together and support of friends and family.
that's right.
And so that's to make the film. So
Yeah,
then to start putting money into the marketing of it is
yes,
is extremely difficult. Because like you
yes,
say, like a big Hollywood film, they'll put if say they make a film for £10 million, well, they'll put another £10 million
yes,
into
yeah,
marketing.
yeah.
Whereas
I
that
mean,
option's not available to you, is it?
sorry, say that again?
That option's not available to you, is it, to do
No,
that?
it's not. And to be honest with you, Martin, literally, kind of, you're watching every penny. And as I say, we're going into production now for is it our third or our fourth feature? I think it's our third feature, and we are paying for this out of our own pockets. And really, you could just carry on, kind of like throwing money to try and up yourself in the algorithm on social media or stuff like that. But is it really worth it? I mean, it's without going down the field of dreams route of build it and they'll come. You
That's
just
my motto at the moment.
I was going to say, which I think for many filmmakers that is their kind of model. That let's hope that people will eventually find it. But then,
Mm,
having said that, streaming has opened up a much wider audience to us than we ever could have expected many years ago. And without wishing to be sort of too negative, let's put some positives out there. Um, digital technology and, you know, what we can do with cameras now, and we can edit at home, and we can create and get great audio. These weren't options that were open to us during the 1980s. You know, you could not make a decent film with, you know, just a I mean, people did with just a high street camera.
Yeah.
And we have to kind of like accept that, all right, you know, it's tough when we're going up against, you know, Warner Brothers or somebody like that. Not that we are directly, but ultimately we do have access to the means of production now, which we never did. We never could. You
No.
couldn't just turn around and make a film.
We're living in a great age where you
Yeah.
can where anyone and everyone pretty much has access to a camera now and has access to the you can get access to equipment. Oh,
Yes.
did I lose you? I lost you there for a sec. Yeah, we've all got access to the equipment to be able to create what we want to create. We can create our dreams, our visions.
Yes.
But on the downside of that, what you're saying is that it's a saturated marketplace now,
Yes.
and it's harder to be found because there's many more doing it. So I guess the question is then for all of us, why are we doing it?
Ah, that is a much deeper question.
Mm,
And it is an interesting question. I mean, really, I'm interested in the kind of creative process, and you know, I read a lot, and you know, kind of look into kind of different approaches and things like that. Because you know, let's put it this way: if you're looking for validation in your life, you know, don't make movies because you know, if you want validation, you know, buy a dog. Dogs are great. Dogs are sort
mm,
of like make you feel good about yourself. Really, the record producer Rick Rubin's written a great book called On Creativity. So I'll
mhm,
actually answer the question by sort of referencing him. He had a singer, female singer who he doesn't name in his book, who was just petrified every time they had to kind of do a recording. And so he said to her, "Look, okay, fine. Um, we don't have to do this. We don't ever have to do this again. You don't ever have to sing. You don't ever have to do any recording. You don't ever have to write a lyric." And she turned around and said, "I couldn't do that." And I think that's the thing. You don't create because you kind of want to. You create because you have to. And that may sound a bit sanctimonious, but I'm not doing this for kind of sort of financial gain. And I'm not really doing it for validation. It's just something I just, you know, if I'm walking past an abandoned building, I immediately think to myself, I could film in there. What could I film in there? And I start
mm,
immediately running a movie in my head. And I don't ever really see that as stopping. And I think all the time I'm able to, I will make films. And, you know, people are going to like some of those films and people aren't. And really, I think the thing about creativity and, you know, you're an actor and you've experienced rejection, and you know, it's the
mhm,
same for kind of sort of like our production company, but you continue because you aren't doing it just for the sake of validation or financial gain. You know, if that's what you're looking for, there are other routes to get that. You're doing it because of this kind of idea of almost self-actualization, that you realize that this is what you want to do, or you were born to do, or however you want to phrase it. And that is kind of what you see yourself as doing. And if you could never do it again, that really would be a big deal, because there are many people who have a go and then say, "You know what, I've had
mhm,
enough of this." And they can walk away from it. But,
mm,
you know, again, my sort of friend and collaborator Kamal Yildirim said it's almost like an addiction, isn't it? And I think it
yeah,
really is that, you know, you kind of go through this process of sort of making something, and it's exhausting, and at times it's hard, and you know, it can have quite a negative impact on you. But then again, you just get up and you do it again, in the same way that, you know, the actor or the performer or the musician who experiences rejection just has to continue. And I think that is why we do it, because it's something beyond just sort of, you know, financial remuneration or validation. I think it is something that, you know, I think creatives, I don't, you know, creatives aren't born. Anybody can be creative, but I think if there is that fire within you, then I think you know, you've got no option but to continue. And
yeah,
you know, if anybody's listening and is sort of sitting there thinking, "Oh God, I'm really unhappy about the latest rejection or whatever," you know, you just got to carry on, because again, you
mhm.
know, like the story I just told, you know, could you not do it and be happy and get out of bed every day? I mean, you
I
know,
think that's the thing, it's once you discover within within whatever field that you're doing within the creative industries. Once you discover who you are,
Yeah.
that's when it becomes addictive. That's when it becomes, I cannot stop. I have to do
Yes.
this to live.
Yeah.
This is who I am. Yeah, Laurence Olivier said that. I
Yeah.
act because I am. Like,
Yes.
this is me, and I
Yeah.
have to do that. And I think in the different industries it can be hard to find a way forward with making a film. So like you've made this film, you've funded it all yourself. How did you? Because it didn't cost you nothing.
No.
So how did you get this off the ground? How did you get this film going?
I mean, do you mean in terms of the creative process, or do you mean where did
In
we
terms
find the
of
money?
creative
And
process, yeah, but a bit of both really, because I feel like they do both intertwine, don't they? They do have to both be considered.
yeah, and there is a kind of element of almost like, the stars are aligning, and you kind of sort of think, oh God, yeah, look, oh wow, and I mean, essentially, what happened was during sort of March 2020, like the rest of the planet, I found myself with a bit more time on my hands than I'd previously had, and I started
Oh,
writing, and I dropped out.
you dropped out there for a second, Michael.
I'm
If
back in
it
the
yeah,
room.
so you're back in the room. Yeah, I think it was, yeah, so just if you could just repeat that just last
Yeah,
10
sure.
seconds there.
So, I mean, essentially, I started writing the script for Burnt Flowers in March 2020 because of COVID and lockdown. I had a lot more opportunity to write and a lot more sort of peace and quiet and free time than I previously did. And sort of our producer Lou Nosbod, as I say, who's also my partner, happened upon the location that you see in Burnt Flowers. And I mean, it was just a kind of sort of chain of fortunate coincidences. And then all of a sudden, you're kind of going, right, so I've got this script and I've got this amazing location. Right, we have to go with this now. So we then started the casting process. And I won't say, and that's it, because we then made the film over a series of kind of, probably in total about 2 years. We were making it in blocks, and we had access to the location, for a limited amount of time. And really, that was kind of how that came about. That, you got a script, and then somebody sort of says, "Well, hang on, would you be interested in filming here?" And it's kind of like, "Yeah." And you then kind of work that out, and you realize it is within, your kind of budget and your finances to be able to do it. And then you start moving all your other pieces in place. And there is a degree of luck in that, you cast the right people, and the people you want to work with are free. But really, it just comes down to suddenly gears start shifting and things start happening. I mean, there is always that element of you have to make those things happen. So you have to go out there and have those conversations and sort of say, look, can we do this? And would you be interested in being our film? And I know I'm making that sound very sort of simple and probably sort of quite trite, but that's really how it happens. And the first short I made, God, years ago now, it really was a case of I went out and bought a camera and then wrote a script and then just press gang people into being in my film and sort of said, can I, film here? And in many respects, that's still the same process that I really use. You start with your script and you then start putting your pieces together, and that's kind of where we are at the moment with our third feature. That we're in pre-production at the moment, and you have your budget, and then you're kind of thinking, what can we do with this? What do we need? Where could we shoot it? And I think it's kind of hard because what you write in the script is not what you always get, but you get something else which is still good. And what I mean by that is they often talk about there are three movies. The first one is the movie that you write. So you write this movie and you kind of go, right, I've got it in my head. This is the movie. Then you go and film this movie and it's different to what you wrote, but it's still quite good and you still like it. Then you start to edit it and you've got a different movie again. So you've got the footage and you're kind of sort of moving the footage. Sorry, you're editing the footage and it changes. And that is the kind of thing which I like about the creative process, that you have to be open to these possibilities and the possibility of change. You can't be too rigid with your ideas.
It
So you
has to
can't
be
sort
fluid. It has to keep
yes,
evolving. You can't necessarily, because you are you wrote this,
yes,
you directed it, you did the marketing. It is a lot of it comes, a lot of the creativity with this film comes from you, but you
yes,
can't take that starting point and be strict and say nothing else happens here. It,
yes.
it's an ever evolving beast. But you also mentioned something early on in that last bit that I want to pick up on. You mentioned a lot of luck happens, but then you
Mm,
went on to tell me about all the hard work that you've been putting into this. So I really kind of question that luck. I really kind
yeah.
of question that in the process of I think a lot of us creators we tend to be quite, some of us modest. Um, some of us tend to go, yeah, luck happened here, but is it luck when we're putting our work out there into the world and making it happen?
Yeah, I mean, also as well, I suppose you've got to be on the lookout for these opportunities. So if you're
Mm.
looking for a particular location, it will present itself eventually, or
If you
you
did
know, you
nothing with your idea, if you did nothing with it, would that
yes,
luck come to you? If you didn't
very
drive it forward?
yes, very true.
Mm,
I mean, I hate to sort of say luck. I mean, I suppose fortuitousness would probably be a sort of better word because really, yeah, you're right. You're driving this thing forward, and it's a bit like sort of being in a car and driving around looking. It's oh look, it's over there. And I think
mm.
that there is an element of that you've actually got to be out there looking for something um, before you can find it. But really, I think that yeah, I mean, I think really if I'd sort of you know try and sort of like formulate it, what I would say is if you are flexible in terms of your ideas and the space in which you can film, and this is also true with casting, you can't sort of say, well, I really wanted to cast a blonde actor for that role. You have to have this kind of sort of like flexibility. And the idea, without getting too sort of metaphysical about it, starts to sort of almost take on a life of its own in that you start to sort of think, well, now we've cast this person and we've got this location. It's kind of different, but actually something's starting to happen here. And, you should recognize that and go with it. And, sort of me and sort of producer Lou Nosbod do joke about the god of film, that there does seem to be some sort of, shall we say, happenstance that happens in which you kind of sort of think, well, that was really lucky. But as you
Mm.
say, you've got to put yourself out there to actually be in the position for those opportunities to present themselves, I guess.
Yes, definitely. Where you've got me to a point with this now is I'm starting to think, where did this philosophy, where did this filmmaking process in general start for you? Where did it begin? We spoke a lot about the old films that inspired you in the 70s, and we spoke about The Man Who Fell to Earth. But where did you start wanting to be a filmmaker?
Oh, very good question. I don't know. I watched a lot of films when I was growing up. I'm a child of the 1970s, and predominantly what was on TV during the 1970s were British films from the 1940s. And
Mhm.
many of the early films which I got to see were the kind of things that used to be on BBC Two on a Sunday afternoon by a director called Michael Powell, who's still one of my favorite directors. And his movies were there was a strangeness about them and a kind of sort of subversive nature. And I mean, I don't know, I'm trying to answer your question here as best I can, Martin, but I don't really know where it came from. That just all of
Mm.
a sudden I looked at these movies and I just sort of thought it'd be great to make something like this, to actually create characters and create your own worlds and create stories. And all
Something
children,
something pulled you in, didn't it? You were being pulled in by that. It wasn't just because it's very similar for me. It wasn't just it was never just entertainment.
no,
There was something more that movies gave me. There was
yeah.
something that was drawing me in, something that I was really that I questioned and was inquisitive about and wanted to be part of it.
Yeah, I mean, when did I start? I mean, I suppose sort of jump forward to when I was a student, and I didn't really know how to make a film. You know, how do you actually sort of like physically go and do this? You know, I know how to write a script and I know a bit about acting and I know a bit about stories, but how do you physically go and make this thing? And I found an old Super 8 camera in a charity shop. I mean, by that point in, you know, this was, I guess, by now about the early 90s, everybody was abandoning Super 8 cameras for sort of video cameras. So I bought this camera. I didn't really know how to use it. And I just kind of went out and just started filming these scenes where I lived. There weren't any people in them, you know, they're just sort of shots of railway tracks and sort of abandoned buildings and stuff like that. And then I kind of got it back and I thought, oh, this actually looks quite good. But also I realized it was silent and it was kind of, oh, how can we overcome that? But to then, you know, move forward to the point in which you're making films and, you know, it's actually being streamed and people around the world are watching it, it was just an incremental process. You know, I think just that desire to want to do it was always there. And it then kind of found expression, as we spoke about earlier, through, I would guess, what you'd call a sort of democratization of technology, in so much as digital technology made that possible. You know, I was never going to get anywhere shooting Super 8 movies. You know, nobody was ever going to
How old
go.
was you at this point that you got this camcorder and started using that?
I mean, it was a film camera, and I guess that was, God, how old was I? 20 at that point.
Yeah.
But I
So
still didn't.
do you feel like at that point when you got that camera, you just allowed yourself to play, that
Mm,
you didn't think too much about what's gonna happen here, or
yes,
just got this piece of technology and you played with it,
yes,
and within that play, you started to discover how to use it and what you
yes,
can do with it?
yes, and I think that that is a really important part of the creative process. This idea of play. And really, you know, I guess I'm still doing this really in that there's an expression, and it, you know, it sounds a bit lofty and slightly pretentious, but it's almost giving yourself the permission to fail. So it's the idea that you can kind of do something, and you know what, it may not work, and you'll kind of go, you know, I tried that and it didn't work. But
Mm,
you tried it, and you know next time that's not an avenue you're going to go down again. I
mm,
mean, several attempts at actually filming with this camera. I got an entire blank reel of film back from this lab in Germany where I used to have to send these off to. But really, it is, as you said, that concept of play, and through that, things will happen. And I think this is often something that we don't allow ourselves to do on set as much as we could do. Just allow ourselves sort of time to experiment. And there's actually some nice stuff in Burnt Flowers, which I won't say it was improvised, but it kind of came about through the process of filming. There's a very end scene, which I'm not going to go into too much detail about, which involves Kathleen Alban doing a dance, who is the sort of, you know, one of the main characters in the film. And
mhm,
that idea just kind of came to me. I thought, could I do that? Would it work? And we did this kind of effect, and it did work, but it may not have worked. And so, what you're saying about this idea of playing to actually work out how all of this really works, yeah, and I think that's really important. And this
mm,
is also something I do with my writing, that I don't just write one draft and go, "Yeah, the script's done now." You keep coming back to it and you keep coming back to it and you take things out and you put things in, but you also should allow yourself the opportunity to have a bit of fun, really, and
yeah.
kind of sort of like, "Ah, yeah, let's do this," you know.
And
But
it
yeah, the
is fun
concept of
when we play, isn't it? It is fun when we play. It takes us back
Mm,
to a place of childhood where we just experimented with things, had fun with the things that we're experimenting with.
yes,
And when we failed, we didn't beat ourselves up over it. Whereas I think
no,
as we get older, for some reason we do beat ourselves up. We try and I don't know what makes us act this way that we get so upset when we fail because there's so much to gain from it, isn't there?
yes. And I think the key thing is to carry on, and I think that's often hard, particularly where there is a financial outlay. And the other thing as well, the older you get, which is, you know, something you do have when you're a child, is the kind of the concept of time, because no adult you speak to has got any time. Two things you never have really, not just in filmmaking, but in life really, is you never have enough time and you never have enough money. And I think that, really we have to just almost take a step back and say, okay, look, it's all right. It didn't work, but we can do something else. And I think we as creatives, there is that element of self-doubt. And you're mentioning about play and childhood. You don't have that self-doubt when you're a child and you're playing. That's why that works. But when you're an adult, it's the idea of self-doubt. And as a creative, you are continuously in a permanent state, or at least I am, of self-doubt. And I think that in some respects that it can be useful because it means that you are self-critical. But at the same time, it can often be quite restrictive in that you may, experience anxiety over pursuing ideas or avenues which you have a fear don't work. And yeah, I mean, if we could just access that sort of inner child and just get back to be able to sort of like the concept of play, which I actually think is very important for creativity.
Mm. Yeah, and it's if there was a way to work this anxiety out of us as well when we're working on something creative, is
Yeah.
it is it helpful for us to worry? I guess that comes in when you start to think of like the financial implications of what you're doing, and you start to think of the audience, and you start to think of your ego. How am I going to be judged for this? I think
Oh,
that's where the anxiety comes in, I guess.
yes. I mean, you mentioned the E word, ego, and I
Oh, sorry,
think
just
that
bear with sorry, I'm having a technical problem. It's called my daughter,
no
forgetting her
problem.
key. There we go. So, yes,
There we go.
it was home time from school,
Seamless,
and
seamless.
of course,
Yeah,
of that's what happens when you're in these live situations. The world is still turning, apparently.
yeah. But I
So,
don't I
where
don't think anybody noticed though, Martin.
there's only 7 people watching, but thank you for those people that are watching for joining us.
Yeah,
And,
thanks, guys. You got to see Martin's daughter there briefly.
so, where was we? Yeah, we got onto the ego. Yeah, where
Yeah,
does that come in what we're doing? Because when you're making an independent film and you're putting your heart and soul into this over 2 years,
yeah,
there's I guess there's gonna be some questions of, yeah, why give up so much of your time and
yeah.
life to this piece of work that you're creating?
Um, I mean, I guess this goes back to what we were saying earlier about the kind of needs to create rather than any kind of sort of sense of seeking validation or kind of economic remuneration. But I'll be honest with you, the nicest kind of sort of like shoots and occasions that I've ever been on in terms of sort of like filming have always been those ones where people just check their egos at the door, and it feels more like a bunch of friends just having a good time and filming something. And a
Mhm.
couple of weeks back, I was filming with Andrew Elias. He just asked me to do a little bit of a walk on part for him in a production that he's making called the Beast of No Man's Land. And we came away afterwards and we just sort of said that was actually really fun, wasn't it? And I think it's because there were no egos at play. And I was helping him out, and Andy has been extremely generous with his help and time. So therefore, you don't have that kind of, I don't know, sense of competition. And I think that really, if you feel that sense of competition and what is it they say, comparison is the thief of joy. And I think if you're continually comparing yourself with other creatives or other films, you will always kind of find yourself or feel that you're lacking. But really, I think it is almost a case, if you can, of check your egos at the door. But if you're working with like-minded, positive, upbeat, optimistic people, egos don't come into it. They really don't. And
Yeah,
you
I
know
feel like when you work on a collaborative project that, yeah, that's when the ego sort of tends to die, when it
mm,
sort of tends to go away. When you're working on a project together, I do a lot of theatre,
Yes.
And I find that theatre works best, like you say, when you've got a group of friends all working together to put something on. And when it isn't just one individual person's thing,
Yes.
it is a group, a collective that put this thing together. That's
Yeah.
when the ego goes, when it
Yes.
becomes about it's almost like when it becomes about others.
Yes, and I think the key word that you mentioned there was collaboration. And really, this is the way I like to work. I like to, I see it as a collaborative process. I don't see it as one individual's madcap idea, which is being driven forward by a bunch
Mhm.
of kind of, subservient people. Ultimately, it is about collaborating, and you can't do it alone. You need people to support you, and really, if you have that attitude of being a collaborator, you'll have a much better time, and you'll get much better results.
Mhm.
Generally, I think that this is one of the nice things that certainly I've encountered in the indie film scene is this kind of sense of collaboration and helping each other out. And I particularly like working with other directors. And by that, I mean, so Kamal Yildirim, who is the cinematographer of Burnt Flowers, is himself a director. And why I like working with other directors is they get the struggle. Same for Andrew Elias, who I mentioned, so
Mhm.
that they can kind of see the, really they understand your pain and they know where you're coming from and they understand the pressures. And so therefore, it's just the best way to make films with a bunch of collaborative people around you.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that I really have been quite humbled by in terms of sort of filmmaking is that people will help you. And it's a really humbling thing because, if you showed up at someone's house and knocked on a door and said, "Can I come in and cook my tea in your front room?" You'd go, "No." But if you say, "Look, is there any chance I could actually just film a scene? I'm a low budget, blah, 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 filmmaker, but I just need a scene in which," you'd be surprised at just how many people turn around and will help you. And it is, for me, it's actually really humbling. And I've been extremely fortunate in the people who've collaborated with us and helped us. And they've just done it for the sake of the project. And I think that, it's very easy to get negative about the creative process and, you know, financial restrictions and it always being a struggle. But you know what? There are people who will help you and they will do it for nothing other than wanting to help you. And, that is something that I will always value about creativity and filmmaking, that I've been so fortunate to meet some really interesting people, but also some really helpful people who have kind of given up their time and resources for no other reason than just, the project or,
Mhm.
that kind of, the magic of wanting to be involved with a film, because there is
Why
something
why
about
do
film.
why do you think that is though, that these people will go out of their way to support your projects, that will give their time and efforts and yeah, they'll go above and beyond for that thing that you're making? Why do you think they do that?
I mean, I think that certainly when you're working with other creatives, as I say, I think they understand the struggle, or they can also see where you're coming from or what you're trying to do. But there is something about cinema and film that is very beguiling. I love music and I love art, and I could literally spend all of my days just either sitting in art galleries or listening to music. But there is something very magical about a film, and I think it's the movement, it's the colors, it's the sound, and this is just very beguiling. But ultimately, I think it is almost that sort of shared belief in a common goal, which a film can actually represent. Because films are big projects. You can, in theory, make music by yourself. You can actually, paint pictures by yourself. But film is something that requires collaboration, and yeah, there's a kind of magic about it. And as I say, people do want to get involved in a way that they wouldn't if you sort of said something like, "Look, I'm trying to restore an antique car." They'd probably go, "Oh, great," but I'm not helping you. Um, and I think that, yeah, as I said earlier, Martin, it's something that I really kind of, I don't want to sound too kind of, sort of, woke or worthy about. But really, it's that kind of idea that I just really have been sort of blown away by, the help that people have given us without expectation of anything in return. And within the kind of sort of like micro horror community and, sort of DIY filmmaking, there are just so many people who will help. And, to any creatives who are listening or who ever listened to this at some point, there are people who will help you. And whatever you need, it will come your way.
Mm.
You have to put yourself out there, but people will help you. And to answer your question, I don't know. The magic of film is probably the best answer I can come up with, or wanting to be part of something kind of, which is bigger than, a single individual, I guess.
Yeah, and like I say, I see it within theatre as well. I see that same thing that people
Yeah.
come together. I did a community Christmas show a couple of years ago, and I had a vision initially, and people came, people got involved, and I wanted to do things that were impossible on the budget that was available to me, but through people getting together and and collaborating, we built something, and it happened, and it actually the production went above and beyond what I could have ever dreamed for
Yeah.
because of those people.
Yes. I mean, I would just echo that with Burnt Flowers. I mean, what you've just said could be what sums up that entire 4-year process with Burnt Flowers. It was above and beyond what it could be expected because of the people who helped us. You had this vision, but that film would be nothing without the people who helped us because we achieved things that I couldn't have done on my own.
Mhm.
And as you say, that it is very humbling. And there is a kind of community feel that kind of comes across. I mean, you were just talking about a production that you're involved in. And it made me kind of think that there is something actually kind of not primitive, but certainly something within us that, many kind of, villages used to have annual kind of, productions. Certainly in Europe, you used to get productions of the Passion, Story of Christ. And then
Mhm.
before that, there were these kind of medieval stories that used to tour. And I guess that there is something, there is a community, I guess, is what we're talking about, isn't it? Really, it's a
Yeah.
sense of community.
Yeah, it's building a community, working on a shared goal, on a
Yeah.
shared vision, um, and it 100% works best when it is shared.
Yes.
Mm. I do see it sometimes. I have seen it, and I guess you may have seen this as well. Sometimes when you do get a director that does have their own vision and doesn't give any freedom or flexibility to others, and you see the result from that as well, don't you? You see the negativity, and you see
Yeah.
the impact that can have when you see that side of it. When you see someone that doesn't allow the actors to breathe, like we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
that doesn't, work with the producers in a certain way and allow the magic to happen because they're so stuck on their vision.
Yes, and to be honest with you, I mean that really is the death of creativity. As we were saying earlier, that inflexibility, and the film is not one person's vision. It isn't. You cannot make a film by yourself, and I think that you have to, give your actors that space because these aren't just automatons who are going to kind of like parrot out lines that you've written. These are
Mhm.
people who are going to bring life to characters, and there is a craft to acting. It isn't. Spoke about Laurence Olivier earlier. He rather, was quite disparaging about acting, and he sort of said, basically remember your lines and don't bump into the furniture. But really, there is a lot more to it than that, and I think that if you look at actors and performances, from the 30s and the 40s, even the 50s, people like James Dean, who were much lauded at the time, these performances now feel very sort of quite mannered. And I think that really acting is a craft, and it's as valid a craft as any other form of creativity. And I think you have to kind of give time and space to your actors to kind of do that. And um I like that collaboration with actors. I like having conversations around character and motivation, and an approach I like is that kind of facts-based approach in that, you don't say that, this character's a bastard. you kind of sort of say, this character when they were 13, they broke into a house and they did this, this, and this. And I think that that kind of approach to character creation, I find more interesting. But kind of returning to that point about directors who get fixed on their own vision, well, that's a recipe for disaster because ultimately there is something about any kind of creative venture that I believe takes on a life of its own, and you have
Mm.
to be responsive to that. And I think that if you aren't responsive to potential collaborations and ideas, um, you're going to come off the worst for that. Literally, you're just going to create a negative atmosphere on set, for one.
Mhm.
And then, secondly, there are opportunities floating out there. I mean, I'm sort of something of a believer of this idea that ideas and themes are almost floating around us, but you've got to be receptive to those. And if you're not receptive to potential sort of like ideas or collaborations from others, you're missing out. Really, this is kind of like somebody who just eats the same sandwich every day. Yeah, you can do
Yeah.
that if you want, but that's, and it will keep you alive. But really, what kind of an existence is that? And creativity, I think, is about collaboration and the idea that, look, we don't all see the world in the same way, and people will have ideas and perceptions that you don't, and they bring that to the table, and that can really, I think, kind of enrich a project rather than, restrict it because it's not adhering 100% to whatever the director's vision is.
I guess that seeing the world in different ways as well. Um, you mentioned as well about how when you're working on an independent film, no one just wears one hat. No one just does one job,
Yeah.
and it makes you a better collaborator if you've experienced different roles. That for me, as an actor, I started as an actor first, but I then became a director, a producer, and then a writer and then all these different things, so that then I could go back to being an actor
Yeah.
and understand that better because I've
Yes.
experienced the other sides. Would you agree
Yes.
that that's kind of a helpful way to move forward with your projects?
100%. I mean, I don't see how you could be a director without having done some acting, or at least have an insight into what the acting process is. And the same is true of, say, being a writer. You know, how can you be a director if you've not really had a go at sort of like writing your own script? And the same is true of camera.
It's
Sam,
understanding those other perspectives, isn't it? It's
yes,
understanding the different angles, the different ways that you can look at it, that then brings it back to you of whatever you were initially, and you can
yeah.
reflect on where you've been, even if you don't stick with it, or you might find a different path.
I, I
But
think I think the point you mentioned about having to wear different hats
mm,
means that we're sort of alluding to sort of like directors who just have this kind of singularity of vision, which can actually be quite a negative thing. But if you wear these different hats as you're kind of working, you kind of sort of think that's a great shot. That'd work for the poster. In
mhm,
in these very sort of simple terms. Or as you're writing, you kind of sort of think this scene would look amazing if we opened on this shot.
mhm,
And you're still learning, and I think that's one of the nice things about the creative process, that I'm always reading stuff about films. I'm always kind of watching interviews and listening to directors' commentaries, and I like to kind of explore the technology behind kind of camera and editing and stuff like this. And I as a director, not only do you need to have that insight of what an actor is going through on your set, you need also to have an understanding of not just visuals but sound as well, and
mm,
to understand what the sound guy has to do to actually be able to capture the dialogue that you've written, and
mm.
really, yeah, the different hats idea, but also remember that this isn't one single person's kind of sort of venture. I mean, often, yeah, on indie films, you are wearing many hats, and there have been occasions where, in a day, I've been filming, directing, setting the lights, getting the food out, and helping with sort of catering,
Mhm.
carrying stuff to the van, and but you know what? It just gives you better insight into the whole process, because if you are just involved at one stage, that cannot enrich your writing. I know that Sam Goldwyn, who was head of obviously MGM, he used to take all of his writers down to the editing rooms where they were editing the movies. And he used to say, right, for this week, you're going to sit next to an editor and watch how films are edited, because he knew that that would help them with their writing. You know, if you don't understand how movies are edited together, how can you write one? And I think this idea of understanding all stages of the process um, certainly really helps with film, but I would say, you know, helps with all aspects of creativity. You know, an actor who has never really, say, directed other actors, or has not really got an insight into writing and the writing process and characterization, this is not going to enrich their craft if they are just focused on one thing. You know, this is something that many designers have found, that, you know, when you're looking for inspiration or kind of solutions to problems, often look in areas which you wouldn't expect. And the same is true of sort of, you know, filmmaking, in that, you know, don't underestimate all stages of it, because they're all important. They're all equally important. And really, you know, this wearing of different hats is, you know, it can be tiring and stressful, but it does enrich your own process and your own creativity.
And that inspiration is important to keep searching for it as well. Not just have that inspiration that you had in your childhood, but having inspiration, finding new inspiration now.
Yes.
Keep
Yeah.
looking for it. Musicians often do it, don't they? Musicians
Yes.
will often go, right, we've done our first album, our second album, but now we need a new sound. Okay, let's
Yeah.
go to India and see,
Yes.
and experience another culture.
Yes.
Um,
I mean,
so, so
I totally, yeah, totally agree with that. Sorry to talk over you, but I just really agree with that kind of idea that, as Martin Scorsese says, you should be continually enriching your palette. You know, don't just keep watching those movies that you like, no matter how tempting it is, just to kind of stick that favorite movie back on again. And as I say, you know, by the same token, you can't turn around and sort of say all modern music is rubbish, or all contemporary sort of like film or TV is rubbish. You know, it isn't. You know, it's continually evolving. And the analogy you made about music, yeah, you know, if you don't go off and kind of go and research other things, you are going to end up like, you know, that three-chord band who just played the same song over and over again. And I suppose this brings us on to, you know, another interesting issue about creativity is the idea that you have to continually change. So Burnt Flowers is very different from first feature I made called Exit. The movie I'm working on at the moment is very different to Burnt Flowers, but this is because of the influences that are kind of continually sort of coming in. And I think as a
Mhm.
creative, you can't, you know, I hate this expression, you can't stand still, and you have to be kind of like changing. You know, you can't just make the same film. You know, you can't just make, you know, the same song over and over again. Although
Mm.
Status Quo did it and had 30 years of success out of doing it. But ultimately, you know, you can't be, you know, the proverbial one trick pony who's just turning out the same movie over and over again. I mean, there are themes and kind of recurrent ideas that creatives continually seem to have in their work.
Mhm.
But this doesn't mean that, you know, as you say, you know, I think you were alluding to the Beatles, that kind of idea that all of a sudden they're making this one kind of music, and then all of
And
a sudden, you know, it's then different. But
mm,
I like that idea of difference. I don't like, you know, the idea that you have to remain constant. I
yeah,
mean, you are, yeah, there is that risk that you're going to kind of like alienate the people who liked your first movie, or they loved those first three albums in which you were singing "I Want to Hold Your Hand," but they didn't really like all the later stuff, which, you know, just seemed really weird. But honestly, yeah, I think that you have to, you know, inform yourself continually, and not
mhm,
just, you know, as a filmmaker, you shouldn't just be looking at movies. You should be looking at art, literature, poetry. I mean, for me, music is a massive part of my creative process and a massive part of my day. I really annoy my missus by walking around the house wearing headphones, and she'll be having a 20-minute conversation with me, completely unaware of the fact that I'm listening to, Russian Duma music through my headphones. And I think that you have to be continually absorbing and just looking for new stuff. And I think that's the creative's kind of spirit, if you like, that you're always kind of sort of thinking, oh wow, look at that, that's really cool. I I love design, I love music, I love art, I love poetry, and all of these things just sort of form part of the tapestry that you weave together. But you have to be open to those influences, I guess.
And I guess sometimes there's a little bit of a danger, isn't there, when we do something right, to stick with what we're doing
Yeah.
when we've found something that works.
Yes.
I often think of the filmmaker Edgar Wright when he made Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
fantastic, new,
Yeah.
original. So much of that film worked, and
Yes.
then he went on to do Hot Fuzz, and
Yeah.
he kind of copied all the same tropes
Yeah.
again. And then he went on to do another film, The World's End, and
Well
all the
then,
same tropes.
yeah,
Yeah,
and it's
and
literally just doing that, isn't it?
exactly, by just finding we found something that's worked here, and now we're just going to
Yeah.
copy. And it gets stale, doesn't it, when you do that, when you don't evolve and you don't look
Yes.
for new inspiration.
Yeah.
It becomes like that, and then okay, it's nice. It maybe yeah, like I say, it's nice for that moment, but it hasn't got longevity. If we want the longevity with the creativity,
Yes.
we must seek inspiration, is what you're saying,
Yes.
and
Very much.
yeah.
I mean,
So
sorry,
so
no,
go
go
on.
on. No, go on.
No, I was gonna move this on to because you mentioned your new film that you're working on. So
Yes.
what is next for you then?
Um, I mean, I'm kind of, it's in some respects this sort of discussion has happened at quite a sort of serendipitous time. We're actually casting for our next feature at the moment. And it's just really interesting having this conversation with you, particularly having a conversation with somebody who's predominantly an actor and sort of discussing all these influences,
Mhm,
because we are in that pre-production stage. And all the things we've spoken about not having rigidity in your ideas and trying to look for different influences, are all really sort of coming into play at the moment. Because you know to actually answer your question, we're in pre-production for what will be our third feature, which will be filming this July. And I'm not saying too much about it because this is kind of part of our way of working at sort of Fausti Films, which I established with my partner Lou Nosbod about 10 years ago now. We don't like putting loads of information out there. I still believe in this idea of a degree of mystery around a film till you're ready to show it to people. I don't want to put 18 hours of BTS footage up before the actual movies come out, or show loads of kind of like effect shots. I want people to watch the movie. And Lou Nosbod, you know, is our producer, and her background is in dance. And there is an idea in dance of what's called the magic of the stage. So you don't appear in your costume except on the stage. You don't wander around the audience in your costume. And I think that that's part of our philosophy. So we are casting for our next film at the moment, and I'm not going to tell you too much about it, Martin, even though you're a nice guy, because I want to preserve some of that mystery.
yeah.
But
Is there
really,
something in
how
this of preserving of protecting the idea as well? Are you
yeah,
protecting the initial we talked a lot about collaboration, but at this stage where you're at right now, you've got a seed of an idea, and you know it's gonna grow into
yes,
something, but you've gotta look after
yes,
that seed right now. Is that the
absolutely.
s and that's the moment that you're at. As it starts to grow, you might get some other people come along and water and tend to it as it grows,
Yes,
but right now, it's for you to look after.
exactly that. And so therefore, yeah, I'm kind of protective of our idea, our seed. And we're
Mhm.
we're kind of looking for locations as well at the moment. And I also don't want to jinx things by kind of going, oh, we got this, it's all going to be brilliant, because it then
Yeah.
might sort of fall through. But
Mhm.
no, I mean, we've got our regular collaborators on board. Kamal Yildirim is going to be cinematographer, extremely talented individual. And the look that he managed to achieve with Burnt Flowers is something that I'm still blown away by when I look at. and he's also again on board for this. Andrew Elias, a regular collaborator, is also involved. We're in the process of casting our leads and principal cast, and we're also location scouting at the moment. But I'm also kind of involved at that stage of pre-visualization, which often gets shortened to previs in the industry talk. But really, what this means is you sit down and you kind of start thinking, I'd quite like it to look like this. And so I start grabbing all these kind of sort of screen grabs of sort of scenes from films or paintings. Paintings are a big sort of inspiration for me. And then the other thing is listening to music, because you have to kind of think about, well, what are the audience going to be hearing, as well as kind of sort of seeing at key points. I mean, kind of, I guess, sort of, following on from what you said earlier, this is there are some similarities with Burnt Flowers in that we are going to be dealing with multiple timelines across different time periods. And I guess our main character is something of an anti-hero. I mean, I was at a festival recently and they sort of said, well, how would you describe it then? So I guess I would describe it as a time travel romance with elements of horror and science fiction. And that's probably all I'm going to say, actually.
Okay, that's a nice little teaser, really. That was it's got me intrigued.
Good.
That's where we started this conversation. There was a lot of intrigue, even
Yeah.
after watching your film, I was intrigued to find out more. And going into hear it, I look forward to seeing what's gonna become of this
Thank
next
you.
film. And I look forward to meeting you at the Romford Film Festival,
I'm sure we will.
which is next week.
It
So
is.
good luck with it. Good luck with the festival.
Yes. Let's get the plug in. It's Saturday night at the Romford Film Festival at 9:30. Burnt Flowers.
And so where do we have to go to find out more about that? Is there a website or a Facebook page?
There is both a website and Facebook page for the Romford Film Festival, and you'll find a ticket link there. And if you want to know more about Fausti Films, let's get those plugs in. Our website is faustifilms.com, where you can go and buy some merch from us. One thing we didn't mention is how we fund our films. We fund it through people buying our stuff. So please buy our stuff so I can make some more films. So you can get some T-shirts and DVDs up there. That'd be greatly appreciated. We're also on all the social media platforms at Fausti Films. And that's where you can find us. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Martin. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. This has been. I've learned so much from you today, Michael. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate you sharing. Really enjoyed the film as well. Good luck in the future. And yeah, I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Martin. Absolute pleasure talking to you.
Oh, and I'd just like to say, because I know quite a few people have joined us today on this live stream. And if anyone watches in the future as we put this out, thank you for listening in and watching. We really appreciate you as well.
Yeah, most definitely.
Thank you.